All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Casey Conlon. I am the Library Sustainability Coordinator for the Mid-Hudson Library System. I wanted to welcome you to the new Minimum Public Library Standards Workshop. I'm joined tonight by Rebecca Smith-Aldrich, who is the Executive Director of the Mid-Hudson Library System. And we're very happy to have you here, especially since this is our very special trustee edition of the new Minimum Public Library Standards Workshop. We always love doing stuff for our trustees, and tonight it's very special to be talking about these new standards that are being put into place. Tonight, you should all be muted as part of this GoToWebinar experience. You do have the opportunity to ask questions in the chat box or the questions box, which should be on the right or somewhere on your device. So if you have any questions or any technical issues, please reach out to Rebecca or I through the questions or the chat area. So today we're going to be talking about the new minimum public library standards as well as the old ones. Many of the old ones have updates that we're going to go over, but we're also going to review the old ones just in case you wanted a little refresher on what's going on right now and what is going to stay the same. We're going to talk about ways that we've seen libraries meet these minimum standards and ways that you can meet them that maybe libraries aren't doing right now or your library might not be doing right now. So you should have a lot of tools to be able to make sure that your library is meeting these standards, but we're also going to provide a list of resources that you can access after this webinar to, if you have any more questions or you need any more information. So of course, Rebecca and I are always available as well. Before we get started, we wanted to try out the poll feature here on GoToWebinar. So we have a poll and you should see it on the screen in a minute. And you should be able to click on how well you know the minimum standards for libraries. So there's a couple options there. They're meant to be a little bit fun, and this is no judgment at this point. I can see some of the answers rolling in here. Some people think they know them like the back of their hand. Some people recognize them as the cornerstones of good library service. We also have a couple of people who think their library is probably okay, and a couple of people who prefer not to say. So in just a minute, we'll close the poll, but I appreciate everybody participating and being good sports here. It helps us to know a little bit about who's here and what they know about things, and to get an idea of what people think of the minimum standards. Okay, so we have a pretty good response rate at this point. I'm going to close it out and I'll show you the results. And so you should be able to see the results here. And so it looks like we have a pretty even split between people who are fairly confident that the library is probably okay with the minimum standards and some folks who are just like, these are the best things ever and we're so happy that they're in place. So thank you very much, everybody, for participating in the poll. We'll have a little follow-up later as well, but we'll go back to our presentation and you should be seeing the presentation again. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about how we feel about the minimum standards, we're going to talk about where they come from. So Education Law Section 254 outlines the Regent's power to fix standards for library service for every public library and association library in the state who receives money from the state or from their local municipality. And it also says that if libraries do not meet the minimum standards that are put in place, those libraries will not be eligible to receive funding from the state or from their municipality. New York Codes Rules and Regulation 90.1 say that libraries each year will actually demonstrate, or not demonstrate, but actually attest to the fact that they are meeting the minimum standards through an annual report to the Division of Library Development. So you may not remember this from each February or March when you approve the annual report to the Division of Library Development, but each year in Section 7 of that annual report, you are looking at all of the minimum standards that are laid out there and you are saying, yes, we meet all of these minimum standards. And so if you don't meet the minimum standards, then you do run the risk of having your registration revoked and or rescinded or suspended, and you could be ineligible to receive funds from the state or from your municipality. In section 90.2 of the rules and regulations, then we actually get into what the actual standards are. And in 90.2, we have the old standards that we've all been saying that we have been meeting this for these past couple of years, for these past couple of decades. And then we have the new standards that will go into effect in January 1st of 2021. So it's pretty weighty stuff to say that you wouldn't be able to receive your funding from your municipality if you weren't to actually meet all of the minimum standards, and it is very scary. More often than not, it's simply some kind of oversight, and the library failed to realize that they didn't put out an annual report to the community in the previous year. And so what will happen is the library on the annual report will indicate that they did not comply with one of the minimum standards. They did not meet one of the minimum standards. And so that will trigger a variance request. And so then the library will create a plan, and it's not a very elaborate plan. It usually just says, we missed this because, we didn't realize we had to do it, or the previous director didn't realize we had to do it. And this year we're gonna do it, and we'll make sure we do it moving forward. The Mid-Hudson Library System Board of Trustees will then review the plan and accept the plan, and the library will enact the plan, and everything will be okay. And you'll be able to continue to receive funding from the public. So this is what normally happens. It's usually not so severe that your registration with the regions is revoked and you're no longer receiving funding. That would probably be a pretty big headline. And we would work really hard to make sure that wouldn't happen. And that's why we have this variance process in place to catch anything that might go a little bit wrong so that we can correct it before it becomes a bigger issue. So why are the minimum standards changing? So it's been a long time since the minimum standards were changed, and these are actually the bare minimum that you have to do to be able to say that you're a library and to receive funds from your community. Now, Rebecca and I give presentations where we talk about the minimum standards with Trustee Essentials. That's a presentation where we talk about these minimum standards so that people have a fighting chance at knowing what they are before they see that annual report maybe at a board meeting. And we always get a laugh when we tell people that one of the minimum standards is to have a telefacsimile machine or a microcomputer terminal or other computer terminal hooked up to a printer. I imagine one of those printers with the paper where you gotta like perforate the sides and you gotta pull it off the edges. So that was the last time that these minimum standards were updated, when those things were viewed as cutting edge or important things that libraries could provide to their communities. Now, I'm not saying that faxes aren't an important thing that you can provide to your community. Every day, you may have people come into your library and send faxes. It is a really important service for many people. And computers are obviously a very big deal in our libraries, and providing access to computers is a big deal. But in 2021, a library that is really serving its community and really relevant and providing relevant services to its community is going to be way more in touch with the people that they serve, and it's going to be out in the community insofar as we can be out there when there is not a risk of COVID-19 and talking to people and getting input from the community. And so we're stepping up what libraries actually have to do to be able to say they're libraries and to receive that funding. So 2021 is with these new minimum standards, is a way to say that this is what the libraries should be doing, and this is what libraries have to do moving forward. Many of our libraries in the Mid-Hudson Library System are way ahead of the curve on this. The work that Rebecca has done and the work that people in the Tech Ops team have done, the work that the sustainability team and the Mid-Hudson Library System has done, has really put the Mid-Hudson Library System libraries in a really good position to be able to support their communities and to meet these minimum standards. So we're going to go over all of these standards, and some of them may sound a little scary, but you're probably well on your way to actually meeting many of these. The fact that you've come to this event shows that you're interested in supporting your community and being really responsible about how the library is governed and who operates the library. So on here, you probably see some classics that you recognize, but there's a couple of new ones on here that have never been here before. These are brand new minimum standards that we're going to go over in just a few minutes. So the other element of this is timing. When does it matter? When do I have to meet these minimum standards? So these minimum standards go into effect January 1st, 2021, which is not that far away. We'll put 2020 behind us very soon. But when they go into effect in 2021, you'll actually have to you'll have a whole extra year to get your ducks in a row and to actually get these minimum standards met before the annual report, which you will have to then attest that you meet these standards in 2022. So in February of 2021, you'll vote and you'll actually confirm that you're meeting the minimum standards using the annual report for the year of 2020. So you have an entire year into 2022 to get your library in shape and to make sure that you're meeting these minimum standards. So again, we're going to start going over them. If you have any questions or you're a little concerned that your library may not be meeting these or you may not be able to meet one in the course of the next year, then you can, of course, reach out to Rebecca and I, and we will be happy to help you figure out a plan to bring yourself in line with these new minimum standards. So the first minimum standard that gets an update, and the first minimum standard is bylaws. So the new minimum standard requires that the bylaws must define the structure and governing function of the Board of Trustees of the library, and that these bylaws must be reviewed at least every 5 years. So if you are not in the practice of reviewing your bylaws, then you may want to start thinking about how you're more frequently going to look these things over and maybe set an annual or at least every 5 years, which is the new minimum standard, plan to review these bylaws. Something that's often confused with the bylaws is the charter. This is a charter file document. These are really long. Many of them are really old. They have correspondence in them. This is an application for a charter, for an absolute charter, as opposed to a provisional charter. And you'll see it is written with a typewriter, and a lot of times there is handwritten notes on here as well. There's lots of information in the charter, like what areas you serve, what areas the library is chartered to serve, as well as number of trustees in the library, and the range, sometimes a range of trustees, and also sometimes the terms of the trustees. It's important to note that the charter or the legislation, in the case of a special district library, is greater than the bylaws, and you cannot make rules in your bylaws that go against your charter. Your charter, education law, those things are more powerful and would supersede your bylaws, and so you cannot make rules in your bylaws that do not line up with your charter. The other thing to remember is if you have a range of trustees, if it says in your charter document, then you can have 9 to 15 trustees on your board. It is a good idea to get into the practice of annually, at an annual organization meeting perhaps, to declare how many trustees will be in the library that year and to actually set a number so that it's not left to that range. This is going to make things a lot easier on you in the future for that year. The recommendations for some of the information that should be in your bylaws, and your bylaws are things that you can set at the Board of Trustees level, are the frequency of your meetings, what officers you actually have serving on the board and their terms and their duties, the fiscal year of the library, if there are any standing committees, how those committees operate and when they report and how people get on those committees, as well as how ad hoc committees are created. One thing that a lot of people maybe don't think about until it's a little too late, or they wish they had thought of it before, is how to deal with errant trustees, or trustees who don't like to play ball, or who can't cooperate with the board, or simply won't show up to meetings. So having a plan for how to deal with that kind of person and outlining it in your bylaws is a good idea ahead of time, because if you're trying to make a rule after the fact, after you have a person who's giving you a hard time, it's not going to work out as well. Along with that is the procedure that you're going to want to come up with for actually filling vacancies that might be on the Board of Trustees. So Rebecca, do we have any questions, or do you have anything that you wanted to add to the bylaws section of this presentation?
Hey everyone, this is Rebecca. Thanks, Casey. You're doing a great job. I put a link to sample bylaws from the trustee handbook in the chat box for anyone who wanted to maybe have something to measure their own bylaws against and make sure they're hitting all the marks that Casey mentioned. We also have samples from other libraries of types that might be similar to yours if you're interested to see those. So if you find yourself on the bylaw review committee, or maybe your policy committee takes care of that, plenty of resources to benchmark your current bylaws against.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. So yeah, so the bylaws are, they help with the continuity of the board. They help, you just figure out how you're actually going to do the work of the library. So just remember that we want to make sure, if you haven't reviewed them in a long time, maybe put that on your to-do list that you want to review these, and to make sure that you review them every 5 years. So the next update, and this is number 2 with a bullet. This is a big one. You don't want to pay attention to this one. It's going to come up again, I promise. So the long-range plan of service must now be community-based, and it must be developed by the Board of Trustees and the library staff. So previously, the long-range plan was something that the board could come up with on its own. The Board of Trustees could decide what the plan for the library would be, and they could set that, they could vote on it, they could approve it, and they could move forward. So now we want to make sure that we actually have input from the community. And if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense. And from what we've seen, libraries who build their plans on input from the community have much more relevant services and a much greater response from the staff and from the community than libraries who have simply created something that hasn't been informed by talking to people out in the community. Sometimes we get questions about how long the long-range plan should be, and 3 to 5 years is a good range, whatever you're comfortable with. Any longer than that, it's probably going to be hard to predict how useful it's going to be, or what those things happening beyond 5 years would be. And any shorter might not be that practical, and you're going to be having to draw a new one up frequently. So shoot for 3 to 5 years when you're creating your long-range plan. And the long-range plan should include your mission statement, as well as goals, high level goals that you are trying to achieve with your library services, as well as objectives. So getting down to what you're actually trying to do to meet those goals. And then the activities that are actually going to contribute to those objectives, and then a method for evaluating the activities that you have put in place to reach those objectives. You also want to keep in mind that you want to use the plan to evaluate your services and think about what services you're providing. We're all working with limited resources, so we have to decide how we're going to allocate the funds we have, as well as the time that we have for staff, and what they're going to put their work towards. And the long-range plan is going to help us figure out what we're trying to do and keep us all on the same page, from the Board of Trustees to the directors to the staff. A well-done plan that has evaluation and activities, and allows room for what we're trying to do, is going to help us all move forward in the same direction. To actually get the community input, we've been using a tool from the Harwood Institute called Turning Outward. And in Turning Outward, we would normally go out into the community and we would ask people, what kind of community do you want to live in? And how is that different from the way things are now? And how can we get there? And who can help us get there? And when we did that, we would hear about people's aspirations for their community. When we knew what kind of community people wanted to live in, we could start to build library services that would help them get there. Right now, we're in the process of trying to rework Turning Outward so that we can do it safely. So right now, the idea of having 8 to 12 people in a room together talking is not something that's a good idea. So we're going to look and see if this is something that we can do online, or to keep our eye on when this might be something that we can do safely again. Number 3 is the annual report to the community. This was already in place, but there's an update. The significant part of the update is that the annual report to the community must be board approved. And it must also be a written report on the progress on the long-range plan that we just talked about. I told you it was going to come back. It's going to come back again. Don't worry. So this is, I think the board approved part is significant. This is something that maybe a library director would have worked on with the board or with the board president to put together some information on what the library has done in the past year and what they're planning to do for the year moving forward. But now we want to make sure that the board is actually looking at this at a board meeting and actually voting to approve this. And it seems kind of odd, but I guess, it wasn't required that it was written before. So perhaps you could have presented this information orally. So some tips for doing your annual report to the community is, I would say, enjoy it. I used to really enjoy doing our annual report to the community when I was a library director at the Pauling Library in Dutchess County. It was just a great time to just talk about some of the great things that the library had done over the past year, and to just really kind of summarize everything with a couple of pictures of people having a great time at the library. As you put together your annual report, look at your long-range plan. Remember those goals and objectives we talked about. Did you reach any of them? Remember, you had evaluations in there to say how close you got to those things. How many people came to programs? What were their experiences at the programs? These are things that are going to be valuable and help you advocate for the library when you share them with the community through the annual report. If you have any other significant accomplishments that you've done, if you've finished a building project or you've finished some significant work at the library, keep an eye out throughout the year for stories from people about how they've used the library and how the library has helped them. Those are great things to share through the annual report to the community. Remember that the annual report to the community is an advocacy tool. It's not just something that you have to do for the new minimum standards. It's a chance to tell people about how great the library is and to get them behind the library. I always loved doing stats when I did the annual report to the community. It's important to remember that your stats need context. So if you have a number of how many books you circulated, is that a lot of books? I don't know. Your community might not know. If you have infographics, it can make it look a little bit flashier. It can make it look a little bit cooler and be a little bit more engaging. It can also put the numbers in context using a return on investment or an ROI. So how many books did you circulate last year? If people had to go and buy those books, how much would that actually cost? That might be one of the ways that you quantify how your library provides services and how valuable it is to your community. As we talked about, everybody loves a good picture of somebody loving the library and having fun at a program, whether it's kids or adults. Keep your phones out and make sure you get those photo release forms signed and let people know how you plan to use the pictures. People are usually pretty happy to hear that their kids are going to be in a library publication, but you also want to be respectful. Some people may not want that. The annual report to the community is also a great place to do thank yous. If you had a legislator that helped you out, give them a high five in print or in digital print with your annual report to the community. Shout out to businesses or other people that have helped the library over the course of the year. This is a really great time to do that. When you think about how to distribute your annual report, think about how you can most widely distribute it. If you send it by mail to all the households that are in your community, you're going to have a lot more reach than if you send it to your email list, which is probably a lot smaller than the number of residences that are in your community. You can also hand it out or leave it in areas where people might congregate or pass through at this point. Again, people aren't congregating too much right now because of safety reasons. I would also say make sure you go out to local meetings, to your chamber meeting, to your Board of Ed meeting, to town board or village board meetings, and tell people about the things that you've written up in your annual report to the community and tell them about the great things that you've done this past year. They might be similar sometimes to the things you did last year, but I can almost guarantee that the people are not going to remember all of the things that happened last year. And they're still going to be really excited to hear about the cool things that went on at the library over the course of the year. Rebecca, did we have any questions, or is there anything that you wanted to talk about with the annual report to the community?
We did have some questions that came up, and we did some answering in the software itself, but I think we should do it verbally as well. We had a
Great.
question related to the, at the very beginning when we talked about the fact that not complying with the commissioner's minimum standards for public libraries can result in the revocation of your registration. And Elliot from Clinton sent in a question about, does direct funding from the taxpayers fall into the category of public funding from a municipality? And the answer is yes. Any taxpayer funding, whether it be authorized at the municipal level with a contract or a local vote, as could be done through a Chapter 414 vote, a 259 vote at the school district level, or maybe county funding that's assigned to all the libraries in the county, and the state money that comes to your library, local library services aid, all of that can be blocked from the board's access if you are out of alignment with the minimum standards and refusing to follow the variance process. The other questions we got were related to bylaws. First question, can we update the bylaws annually or just confirm them? You can certainly do it annually. You could also confirm them annually if you'd like to, but you want to see a date at the bottom of the bylaws that was board approved or board voted on for that review at least every 5 years. But you can certainly be an overachiever, Karen, and do that more often if you'd like to. And Pauline had a question also related to bylaws about, should you look at bylaws a few at a time, covering all at the end of 5 years and begin again? And I think Pauline's actually referring to policies at the library, because we have dozens of policies at the library, right? And thinking about doing all of them at once every 5 years is going to be tough. Casey's going to talk about policies in a few minutes here, but we'll just give you a little preview there that you should definitely stagger the review of those policies so it's not overwhelming. But your bylaws, just it's a standalone document, you can do that probably in the space of probably 1 or 2 meetings.
All right. Great. Oh, look at that.
What do you know?
Board approved written policies reviewed every 5 years. So this is a change. Previously, you could just have the policies and you wouldn't have to review them. I think it's very good practice to review the policies at least some interval, and so I'm glad that they have set every 5 years here. As Rebecca said, you can chunk it up into different pieces to make sure that you go over the whole thing over the course of 5 years. Probably not a good idea to take it on all at once. Your board approved written policies are the things that help the staff actually carry out the work of the library and help the staff enforce the rules of the library and help them carry out the services that you want to see in the library. So some tips. It's a good idea. It's best practice to start with sample policies. It's not necessary to start writing your own policy from scratch. We have a lot of policies on our website. In fact, we have all of the recommended policies, I believe, from the trustee handbook on our website right now. We have a sample for each of them, a sample policy, so you can start building on that. You can look around at other libraries' policies if you can get your hands on them on the internet if you don't find something that you need on our website. Each year, except for 2020, we send out something called the Essential Documents Inventory, where we list all of the essential documents, and we have a spreadsheet where we track how many of them your library has that you have told us about. Not everybody is always as thorough in reporting to us what policies they have, so sometimes there's discrepancies, but we usually use this as an annual reminder to remind you, hey, these are the policies you really ought to have based on the experience of other libraries and other systems. So here on the screen, we have a couple of policies that are absolutely required, and if you don't have these, you should definitely prioritize these ones here. As a note, we'll be sharing out this presentation, so don't feel compelled to write down these 10 or so policies here. And we are also available, as I may have said before, we are available to help you with policy questions that you have or any questions that you have about the minimum standards. And we can also help you prioritize which policies that you want to get in place if you're looking at a mountain of policies that you need to do or that you don't have in place yet. We are happy to help you prioritize which ones to do first. Rebecca, was there any questions about policies, or is there anything else that we wanted to talk about?
No questions as of yet about policies. I'll just point out that I shared a tool for you that a lot of libraries use to keep track of their policies when they were last reviewed, so you can kind of see at a glance. It's an Excel workbook link. So it'll open up in Microsoft Excel, but it lets you track when each policy was last reviewed, and the list you see there matches the list you see in the trustee handbook, which matches the Mid-Hudson Essential Documents Inventory. So we work to make those all line up. Of course, things get added unexpectedly sometimes. For example, a law was just passed requiring all agencies to have a pandemic response plan by April of next year. So that will be going on that list. We got a question 2 weeks ago at a trustee workshop about equity, diversity, and inclusion statements. That will probably end up going on the list once the state library weighs in. So it's a living list, shall we say, and you may or may not have them all, but I will say if you don't have them all, don't be too worried. We can help you prioritize the ones that are, I think, the biggest legal risk not to have, and we can help you prioritize those.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, next up is board approved written budget. So updates to this item, the budget item, include that the budget must be prepared and published, and it must be approved by the board. And we also, in the new minimum standard, we tie the budget to community needs through services in the long range plan. So previously, if you were a public library, or if you had a library go up, or if you had a budget go up for vote in front of the public, that would have satisfied this minimum standard. But now we want to be sure that the library is actually publishing both in print, so have a print copy somewhere behind the circulation desk maybe if somebody has a question and they want to see the budget, and also to publish a copy of the budget to the website where somebody can actually look at it and see what the library plans to spend for the coming year. The budget should be prepared by the Board of Trustees and the library director. And the budget should be available, as I just said, in print and online. Are there any questions about the budget?
Nothing yet.
Okay. Keep them rolling in. We'll keep moving, but we can answer questions as they come up. So minimum standard number 6, we must evaluate the programs, services, and collection according to the long range plan. So previously, libraries were only required to evaluate the collection, but as we've talked about, the services and the programs that the library provides to the community are also important, and the fact that these things are included in the evaluation part of the minimum standards proves that these are part of the evolving role of the library. So when you're evaluating these, you want to use qualitative and quantitative measures, whatever makes the most sense. Surveys can be good. You ask people who've gone to programs or people who use the library what they think of the library or the services. One of the surveys that we think is really great is Project Outcome. Project Outcome has surveys for programs, and you can actually find out if your programs are achieving the outcomes that you set out to do with them. So there are surveys for early literacy programs where you can ask, or people respond to the question, are their children more confident readers or more confident in their reading as being part of the library program? Or are people more aware of library services as a result of the program that they've gone to? Or are people going to use the tools that they learned about at the library program as a result of coming to the program? So seeing if our programs are having the effects that we want them to have, that's one of the evaluation parts. And if they're not doing what we anticipated they would do and what we want them to do as part of our long range plan, saying, is there a different program we can do, or is there something different we can do? Is there a way we can change this? Focus groups are another good way, asking people what they think of a particular program or library service, and then using the conversation in the group to actually see what their feelings are about it. And then, of course, statistics, just counting what actually happened. Do we have more people coming to the programs, or do we have fewer people coming to the programs? That might be an indicator of whether you need a program like that. Are there still children in the community, or are there as many children as there used to be? Do you need the same number of programs that cater to families and groups that have small children as you used to? Or is the demographic in your community changing? Number 7 is scheduled hours. I don't think we have any of our libraries who ever have problems with these up until 2020. There is no update to this one, so we get away on this one. But of course, it's worth noting that many of our libraries, because of the definition of open, or a library being open, will not be able to meet this minimum standard this year for the entire year. The library, your libraries, of course, many of them never closed. The buildings were closed, but your staff was still really hard at work, actually meeting community's needs in new ways they hadn't had to before, through Zoom meetings and phone calls, and now curbside service or having people into the building and with added precautions. So there might be some notes in the DLD fields this year in the annual report to indicate that no, we could not have been open for these hours because there was actually executive orders from the state that said that we couldn't have our building open. But in general, our libraries in the Mid-Hudson library system don't have a problem meeting this minimum standard.
Casey, I'll just jump in on this one because we're in such a unique situation this year with COVID. Some of our libraries are opened at reduced hours. So maybe they're doing curbside, but only for a few hours a day. We will be looking for all libraries to have a plan in place by the end of this year for how you will come back up to your minimum weekly hours as you approach the annual report season in the first 2 months of next year. So something to be thinking about if you're one of those libraries that is currently operating under reduced hours.
Okay. Any questions that we wanted to do, Rebecca? Or
We had a question from Karen about how detailed should the annual budget be that is shown on the website. She noted that they have 2 versions, detailed and summary. The summary is probably fine. If you might think of it also as the categorical, like a category budget where you're just showing the top level categories, how much is in personnel, library materials, that type of thing, that's fine. You want to give taxpayers a chance to understand how funds are being spent on their behalf. Of course, if they were to ask you for a more detailed version, you want to be able to give them that. But I think on the website, that summary version is fine.
great.
The other comment was a shout out to our finance officer and personnel officer, Linda Vitone, who announced her retirement at the end of the year, and Karen gave her a shout out, which is super nice because Linda's been really helpful to everyone over her 20 years at Mid-Hudson.
To me as well. Not for 20 years, but for the time I've had to spend with her. Okay, so minimum standard number 8. So the library maintains a facility. And so the updates to this are that the facility that you provide to the public should be maintained in a way that meets the needs of the community based on the long-range plan. We also have very conspicuously included in this minimum standard, which was not before, that the library must provide a public restroom. So there must be a restroom that is accessible to the public. This was not readily apparent in the way that the minimum standard was written previously. The library, another thing that was added to the facility requirements is the power and data infrastructure. So previously, we might not have thought that we would need to provide a facility in the community that would have to support many people working from home or working remotely, but we may see changes in our community that have more people who are looking for a place to get online or do some work or connect. And so do you have the capacity, whether it's outlets for people to be able to plug in their devices so you don't have to run extension cords all over the floor, or actual broadband capability, the volume of the internet access that you need to actually have enough bandwidth for people to get on and to download and upload the information that they need to, so that they can have video calls or audio calls depending on what people are doing in your library. So thinking about those needs, again, as informed by the long range plan, and thinking through how you can meet those needs. So we have a link here to the facility plan template. Anybody who's done the construction aid program, the application to the state aid for library construction program, is familiar with the facility plan because it is one of the requirements. You can also build into this how you plan to meet the community's needs. Always keeping in mind that accessibility from the ADA should be a priority in your library facility. So here's a brand new one. This one has never been a minimum standard before, but it recognizes the changing role of the library in the community. So now the library must provide programming to address community needs as outlined in the library's long-range plan of service. So looking again at what people want from their community and then building in programs that are actually going to help people realize that kind of aspiration for their community. Many of our libraries who went through the Turning Outward program heard that people wanted to feel more connected to their neighbors. And so one of the things that they built into their long-range plan was that their programs would actually include time before or after the program, or the programs themselves would allow people to connect with their neighbors and see other people at the programs and maybe chit-chat and talk a little bit. So as you think through providing programming to your community, which many of our libraries are already doing, I don't think there are many Mid-Hudson libraries who are going to have a problem meeting this minimum standard. But setting goals for those programs, again, through the long-range plan, what do you want your programs to do? And then thinking of ways to evaluate those, whether it's through project outcome, as we talked about earlier, or just through statistics on people coming to the program and how many people are coming or not coming to the program. Be sure you consider your resources again, how many staff people you have. Do you have staff people who are available to do programs, or are you pulling a clerk over to be able to do a program? Do they have time, and do you have money to pay to do this? Are you serving all the community that you want to, or all the populations in the community that there's demand for? Do you have teen programs? Is there some place for teens to go at the library and something for them to do? And just a quick note, something that came out of our lab project that we did last year, where we focused on increasing program attendance at the library, was to make sure that all staff know about what's happening with programs in the library. Sometimes it can be relegated to a programmer's job, and so not everybody will know that there's a program coming up tonight. But frontline staff, people who are checking out the books, they are really great connectors in the community, and they get to see everybody who comes through the library. And if they know that there's a program tonight, they might be able to kind of let people know, like, oh, hey, just so you know, there's this thing going on. Even now, as we do curbside, if you have any contact with folks, whether you see them from 6 feet away, letting them know, hey, they have this virtual program. If you wanted to come find out about, finding fact-checking resources that you can access online. So, just thinking through programming and the programs that you provide to folks with through the library. Rebecca, did we have any questions, or do you have any feedback on programming or input?
Well, programming, I'll just give a shout out to, because this is really the first time the education department is acknowledging a broader educational role for libraries, which might seem strange to you, because since you've been on the board at the library, programming has probably been something that always has happened at your library. But the previous core elements of the minimum standards really only addressed collections and physical items, and really just did not talk about what a modern public library is doing. So I think it's an incredible addition to see programming in the minimum standards now for public libraries. You might not think that's a big deal, but it actually is a huge deal when you think about the history of libraries in New York State. We did have a question here from Karen about turning outward, and would it be helpful in reaching out to our communities, or is that more useful for Mid-Hudson? And actually the program is designed for your libraries to use to go out into the community and speak to your residents, and that's the program that Casey described, that Mid-Hudson is actually I'm going to say customized it because in the link that I put into the questions box there, which I'll also put in the chat box, it's a big program and it might feel overwhelming when you go to look at it. So what Casey and I have done is customized it so it's more accessible for libraries the size of libraries we have in the Mid-Hudson region. And so that's the program we're looking to create an opportunity for you to attend in the coming year, given that we're holding all of our programs online next year. This is normally something we do in a team environment in the Mid-Hudson Auditorium in Poughkeepsie. Obviously, that's not our reality right now. So if you need to do a new long-range plan or you really want to upgrade your current long-range plan to be more invested with community input, this could be a really good strategy for you to use. So you may want to put that on your kind of tickler file to keep your eye out for announcements about that program. Or you could always, just be brave and do it yourself and use the resources at that website I just posted to help you do that.
Yes, that program is a great way to build partnerships too. We have a lot of libraries who are already very active in their community report that they had many new partners who were just really excited to see the library come out and talk to them about what's happening in the community.
That's it on the questions then for now, Casey.
All right. So minimum standard number 10, the library provides equipment. And so here, a significant update for many libraries, but again, not for many Mid-Hudson libraries, a circulation system to access the library's collection and other library catalogs. So this is not a big deal for Mid-Hudson libraries, so as all of our 66 libraries at this point are on our Sierra and Encore ILS, interlibrary loan software. And so we all have access, all our libraries have access to all the 65 other libraries catalogs to see what books are available and other materials, of course, DVDs, video games, museum passes. You can search all of them from any computer. There's over 3 million items that are in the catalog at this point, way more than 3 million because we had many of our libraries who stepped up their game with e-resources that they're providing. So this circulation system has been in place since I started working in these libraries a couple of years ago. And so it's not really new to a lot of us, but it is very valuable, and I just wanted to talk about it for a minute. Again, it provides us with 3 million items. It links up 66 libraries and 70 buildings. It also provides us with a lot of statistics, so we can see what books actually went out, and importantly, what books didn't go out. And those books that didn't go out, it allows us to remove those from our collection and make room for the things that the libraries are doing, whether it's programming or more room for new books that people are actually looking for, or other books that people are looking for. So this circulation system does a lot of work, and we really got to tip our hat to it and the tech ops team who helps keep it going. This circulation system is a very big deal. We're lucky that we already have this in place. This would be a very large lift if we were to have to make this update, and a lot of libraries didn't have this in place already. The other thing that we have to provide is the equipment, technology, and connectivity to access information. So again, thinking about, do we have the right level of broadband to actually help people do what they need to do on the internet? A lot of our libraries are looking for that 100 megabit per second connection. That's the gigabit connection that we're looking to get libraries to move towards. And for planning for updating your equipment, upgrading your equipment, whether you're going to upgrade a couple of your computers at a time, or if there's new technology that you're looking to bring into the library, being smart about planning for those upgrades, or if you're gonna just buy all the computers at once and just take that big bite out of that budget, just keeping that in mind and building that into the technology plan that we have, again, linked here. So number 11, library information has an update. So now we will provide access to current library information in print and online. Previously, you were able to get away with maybe printing out a bookmark that had some of the library's contact information and the hours, but now you are actually required to provide a lot more information about how the library actually operates. And the idea behind this is that people can be more involved and understand how their library operates. Rebecca and I often talk about transparency, and there's a very high level of transparency to an organization who actually shares their bylaws, their long-range plan, their annual report to the community, policies, and budget. Many organizations are required to do some of the things on here, but now libraries are required to share all these things. And you'll notice that the things that are listed here are items 1 through 5 that we talked about in standards 1 through 5. So definitely have these on your website. Make sure they're kept up to date. But also, again, have a couple of these behind the circulation desk in case somebody wanted to read a copy of these or wanted to have access to a copy of them in print.
Casey, I'll just jump in on number 4 with policies, because libraries have a lot of policies and you might think that's overkill to have on your website, and you might be right. Maybe you don't need every single little policy that you have on the website, but you certainly want the ones that are what we call patron facing. So the ones that are related to patron code of conduct, exhibit space, meeting space, how you get a card, confidentiality, things that your patrons would want to know about how to use your library. So when we use that phrase, give them a fighting chance to know what the rules are. When you think about it right now, it is kind of mysterious how they might know what the rules are if they aren't on your website and you're not posted in your library. So when you're prioritizing what might go on the website, I'd say start with those public-facing policies first, and anything else you think is critical to showing the transparency that the board engages in to retain the public's trust.
All right, a couple tips for library information. Have print copies available, as we discussed. Distribute locally. Think about this, at least for the public-facing information, as another kind of outreach or advocacy or an engagement tool. You might, along with the annual report, you might leave these out in the community. You might hand these to somebody who, when they first get a library card, to give them information about what's actually happening at the library. When you're writing up a document like this, especially for the public facing and for the patron document that you're going to hand out to them, especially we have the word rules up there, make sure that you're using a welcoming tone. We don't want to talk about all the things that people can't do at the library. We want to encourage them to actually use the library and not scare them off from all the things that they can't do and all the many penalties that we might put in place for different types of things they might do. You might also think about if you produce a document like this in print, and keep in mind it doesn't have to be flashy or glossy. It might be something that you can print out and even maybe cut up on a paper cutter so you can get a couple out of every page, double-sided. Maybe repackaging this into a welcoming email series. We've seen some libraries do this, and you may be familiar with this kind of program from other products that you've bought or services that you've joined. The first week might be a, hey, did you know you could renew books with your library card? And then following 2 weeks after that, there might be something about using museum passes or some other service in the library that you don't think that people would really know about at face value. So keeping in mind that what we're trying to do here is to make sure that people know what the library offers and can actually have a fighting chance at actually using all the things that the library offers. The other thing that we're trying to do is make sure that people have a chance to actually participate in the library. As taxpayers, they have the right, and you as trustees have certain obligations to them as taxpayers and as public, making sure that your board meeting dates and times are available on your website and published or posted conspicuously in the library building. I don't know if there's anybody who's ever tried to go to a town or village board meeting where they weren't maybe too quick about getting the info up, and it's always very frustrating. And I think it makes me understand that we're disenfranchised when I can't find out when the meeting is and I can't actually go to the meeting. So you don't want to put somebody in that kind of situation. You want to make sure that you're transparent and people can make it to the meeting if they want to see what's going on with the governance of the library. Publishing an agenda for what you plan to do at the board meeting a week in advance and posting that online is always good practice. And if you have a special meeting, trying to get that 72 hours in advance out and posted. The other thing that's worth noting is that your draft board meeting minutes should be posted to the website within 2 weeks of your meeting. And of course, these are draft board meeting minutes. Many of us have monthly board meetings for our library boards, so it would be hard to have, it's not necessary to have 2 meetings um, to be able to approve the minutes of the meeting. So the draft meeting minutes should be posted within 2 weeks. Are there any questions, Rebecca, or do you have anything you want to talk about with library information?
No new questions came in, and I think you did a very thorough job there. Thank you.
All right. Okay, number 12, there is no update for number 12. Number 12 is the requirements, the educational requirements for hiring a library director. Sometimes civil service might have something to say about this as well, but these are the minimum standards for the educational attainment of the library director that you hire. And you'll see there's 2 columns. There's one for if the library were not a member of a public library system, but anybody who's on this webinar shouldn't have to really worry about that because you should all be part of the Mid-Hudson Library System. But you'll see the standards are a little bit different, and I think it's in recognition of the support that the library system provides to the library director and to the trustees and to the library itself. Please keep in mind when you're hiring a library director that the salaries, hours, and benefits should be comparable to another position in your community that requires a similar level of education and hours worked. And try to include funds for continuing education for your library director when you're setting out your budget for the year.
I think I'll just point out that the people might be confused in our system, at least at that point you made, Casey, of really there's people that, libraries that aren't a member of a public library system. But I think you can see, the difference there between being a member and being not a member. There's lower education requirements if your library is a member of the system, because the state knows that the library system itself is required to have staff like Casey and myself who have a master's degree in library science to support your staff. So that's why you're seeing that difference between libraries that are part of a system and those that are not.
That's a good point. Thank you. All right, number 13, this one's brand new. Annual technology training. So you must provide library staff with annual technology training appropriate to their positions to address community needs. So we spend a lot of money, as we talked about a couple of minutes ago, on computers and on software and on online services and ebooks and many things that would come under the umbrella of technology. And those things aren't worth a whole heck of a lot if the people in our communities can't actually use them. So we want to make sure that the people who are working in our libraries can help the people who come into our libraries to use those things. So it might be appropriate for a clerk or somebody who works at the circulation desk to know how to help somebody access books through Overdrive. That might not be a process that's intuitive to every single person in your community, but you want to be able to help them access ebooks and e-audiobooks that way, if that's what they want to do. Other staff might be required to help people once in a while to format a resume or to navigate a web browser or to get to their email. So whatever the staff's regular duties are, you're going to want to make sure that you have training that's appropriate to them and to start doing it annually so that they have a good chance at actually helping the people in the library to use the many resources that the library provides. So some opportunities for continuing education might be a professional development day for staff if you have one of those, if you have a whole day where all the staff gets together to talk about things and build in some training to that for technology. Staff meetings, if you can do small pieces of tech training at a staff meeting, if it's a shorter meeting, if it's not an entire day. There's many webinars and online courses that are out there, even things that are available through Universal Class, which is a service that all Mid-Hudson Library System patrons have access to, and so do our library staff members. There's also a lot of webinars like this one. This one isn't specific to technology, but Mid-Hudson offers a lot of technology-specific webinars that are relevant to many of our library clerks and many people working in our libraries. Conferences are another great place to learn about technology and technological services that you can provide to the library. And we have the technology plan up here again, just because inside that is a place that you can build in the idea that you would be spending money and time to actually have staff get educated on the technology that is in the library. Again, it's not, if you have a new cool thing that you've put into place, you want to make sure that there's somebody there to help that. You want to build that into your library's plan.
And Casey, I'll just jump in here for a sec. I think when you think about the trustees' role in this, as the governing body of the organization, I would say how it relates to this particular item is making sure there's funding in the budget to underwrite staff education in case we actually are going to conferences or need to pay for a sub while someone goes to training, to make sure there's actually a cushion there to make that happen. So I think that's the thing to look for when we think about how trustees help the library be in compliance with this one.
Absolutely. All right, and number 14, this is our last one, and this is a brand new one. So the library must establish and maintain partnerships with community organizations, which enable the library to address its community needs. So this one's brand new, but again, this one shouldn't be new to many of our libraries, and I don't think it is based on the libraries that I talked to. Establishing partnerships allows us to bring new and sometimes greater programs and services to our patrons. Many of us aren't experts, or many of the people at our libraries aren't experts in every single field, but we have communities filled with people who may have expertise in different fields. And so if we can tap into that and bring them in, if it's different community organizations, then that helps us bring more services to our community. It also allows us to reach new users, because if we're always going back to the same people that we interact with, we're not going to see anybody new, or it's hard to see new people. But if we actually go to another organization and they come into the library to do something, or the library does something with them in partnership at their place of business or whatever that they're working on, that will enable us to actually meet new people and have new people exposed to the great things and the resources that are available from the library. So we have some possible partners here, including workforce development organizations who might come into the library or remotely at this point, provide resume help or job coaching skills. The Head Start program gets kids ready for school, so that you might be partnering with Head Start to do screenings for kids. Schools are always a really great partner in the community. A lot of times the library and the school are working towards similar goals. So if you can partner with the school, you all can work together and leverage your resources that you both have to go, because you're all going to the same place. You have similar goals. If you have a local historical society, you might be able to partner with them to have a program come in. Many people in our community see the library as leaders in historical information and local history information, so this is a very good partnership. The Cornell Cooperative Extension offers a lot of really interesting programs, including agricultural programs or horticultural programs. And the Chamber of Commerce also. Libraries and businesses are not necessarily mutually exclusive, and many businesses are happy to share the expertise that they have with library patrons through a program, and it can often result in really good mutual benefit too, because people get to meet a local business person in the context of the library, where they already have a lot of trust and where they may already be used to learning things and coming to programs. Do we have any other questions, Rebecca?
Yeah, we got a great question from Ray at Opus about this, about how formal do partnerships have to be. So what I've done is taken the language from the helpful information for meeting minimum standards for public libraries, which I'm actually putting in the chat box right now. So you all have access to all of the tips for all 14, but specifically for the issue of how formal partnerships have to be, the Division of Library Development defined it that you must demonstrate that it is actively partnering with one or more community partners. So as you'll see, it's not super specific in terms of needing to have a memo of understanding in place, but you'd want to be able to produce perhaps a flyer that showed you worked to collaboratively offer a program at the library or through the library's online programming software that would serve as the evidence of that partnership.
Okay, great. So you successfully made it through all 14 of the minimum standards that will be in place starting January 1st, 2021. Some of the resources that are particularly helpful, right here at the top, we have the minimum standards comparison chart. And so you can see side by side the old standards, the old standards for you and then the new standards, and to see how that they're actually different and what's changed. I think that's pretty helpful in understanding this. There's also, I believe Rebecca shared the link. It's right there, and we'll be sending this out later, and we'll include that link as well, is the publication, the helpful information for meeting minimum public library standards, which goes into all of these standards in more detail. There's 2 links for that one. There's an online interface where you can kind of click through like a website. And then there's also a PDF version if you wanted to take it offline or if you wanted to read it in some other way. Both include hyperlinks to resources for more information. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about tonight, there'll be more info on that. There'll be links to the sample bylaws, the tech plan and the facility plan from Mid-Hudson in there. So if you want some more info, that's a good place to start.
So Casey, another question we got is how do we access the chat box after the meeting? And I don't think you can access the chat box, but as Casey said, we'll take all the links I put into the chat box and put them in the follow-up email when we ask you to fill out the evaluation. So you'll get them all summarized in that email to you.
Okay. All right, so we want to do one more poll before we let everybody go. And we just want to ask again, how well do you think you know the minimum standards now that we've done a little bit of time with them, spent a little bit of time on the minimum standards? Oh, we got some good responses here that I can say. Well, a lot of people recognize them as the cornerstones of good library service. A lot of people think their library is probably okay still. All right. All right, so we had a lot of people respond here. It looks like we have a lot more people see them as the cornerstones of good library service, and a lot of people think they're probably okay. And I just want everybody to remember that you know, if you're feeling like you're just okay, remember that your library director knows a lot about the minimum standards, and you might be talking about them more than you would in previous years. And also, Rebecca and I are always here, and we like talking about minimum standards. I know that Rebecca does, and I know that I do too. I don't normally speak for her, but I know that we do. And we got the packets. I got them printed out and everything. So we just wanted to pause again and see if there's any questions. We've handled, or we've had a bunch of questions as we work through here, but there's certainly more time now, and there's always time after where we can address questions if there was something that you weren't comfortable asking here at the webinar. We can certainly do more questions.
So Casey, the only other question that's come through so far is again from Elliot, asking if there was a specific circumstance that triggered the development of the new standards. And I'll just say that as the person who ended up co-chairing the committee that did this work, it was definitely triggered by a bit of embarrassment that they hadn't been fully reconsidered since the 1980s. There might have been a tweak here and there, but as Casey pointed out, there's a lot of dated language in there. A great example is the equipment standard that actually, if you actually dug into the regulation and read it, they didn't even require that you provide public computers or fax machines for the public. They were actually only required for facilitating interlibrary loans, so really only for staff use. So the more we looked at them, the more we realized they were pretty out of date, and they weren't helping to build stronger libraries in New York State. So if we think about what is the bare minimum to be a quality library in our state, we really wanted to refocus energy for our boards on making sure that we're making decisions in the context of community input and that we're being extremely transparent. And almost all of the things that you see that were tweaked in the minimum standards, and trust me, there was a lot of stuff that didn't make it into the final cut. And if you'd buy me a drink, I'll tell you the whole story. But the things that you see that were tweaked that Casey pointed out were adjusted or added are really to either acknowledge the real role that libraries are playing in communities, to make sure that community-centered approach in planning was evident throughout, and to reinforce the need for transparency in how we govern our libraries to make sure we retain the public trust.
Okay. Well, we can stick around and we can answer questions. If there are no other questions, though, then I just want to say thank you to everybody who came out. As always, our trustees are the ones who are really doing all the work around here for making sure that the library is in line, especially here with a lot of these governance issues that we've talked about and the bylaws. So thank you very much for making time to come to this webinar here and to learn about the minimum standards. And please do reach out to us if you do have other questions. We're very happy to help. All right, so I'm gonna